The Carmelites and I are thrilled that you are joining us in this feast day celebration in this virtual way. We are all one in our love for St. Therese and our common experience of the ways she has listened to and answered our prayers, has touched, healed, calmed our lives to trust God with childlike confidence. Isolation, struggles, frustration, fear, and loneliness can shrink our spirit. I've certainly asked more often these days, "Where are you, Lord? Therese, where are you?" Didn't they promise to be with us, and hopefully in ways that we can understand? But the overriding feeling these days can be frustrating abandonment, darkness, and lost hope. The hiddenness of God is supposed to lead us to a closer trust and intimacy, according to Therese's mentor, Carmelite St. John of the Cross, a doctor of the church as she became. But sometimes we're just lost and feel abandoned. The beautiful window in this museum chapel captures his vision of the journey to God. Sometimes we get caught and trapped in the dark nights that are expressed in the colors of this window. You know, most of us, if I think we're honest, are attracted to St. Therese because she's real. She's not one of those boring plastic saints whose lives don't necessarily inspire us. Those saints, we're grateful that they made it, but we don't want to live that way. They seem to live in a world that's not like ours. But we've all learned how really human Therese was and how she shares our humanity and understands our needs, longings, and vulnerabilities. As many of you know, Therese was all over my life. My grandmother had that pious picture of her in her living room, and there was a large statue of her, and she was on the stained glass windows of our Italian ethnic Roman Catholic Church of St. Anne in New Britain, Connecticut, where I grew up. Those piously doctored pictures and images of her honestly didn't appeal to me. That otherworldly misery did nothing to inspire or draw me close. But when I was in the Carmelite novitiate at 19 years old, I read her life story. I wanted to know all the stars of this Carmelite tradition of spirituality that I was being called to. As a young man who wanted to take on the world, her story of the soul really didn't appeal to me. She seemed like a spoiled, overly sensitive person who needed a good shrink to straighten her out. So ultimately I ignored her, even as I was wondering about what this Carmelite spirituality was all about. This impression was heightened by a large statue of her namesake, Therese of Avila. It was right in the corner outside our classroom in the novitiate. And she was having an ecstatic experience of union, but it looked like she was in awful pain. Just what was I getting into? I did love Therese of Avila's complaint to the Lord, "No wonder you have so few friends, the way you treat them." Then when I was asked to become director of the Society of Little Flower in 1991, I actually balked, and I fought the assignment for many reasons. But ultimately, as I explained to our provincial, "Look, I don't even like her." He smiled, and he said, "We'll learn to." And that changed my life. A few years later, when I had my first spinal surgery and the recovery was taking much longer than I expected, my Sicilian temperament was angry, and it silenced God and Therese. It's not easy to pray when you're actually in pain. We can punish people with silence. After months of silence and self-pity, I asked Therese, "How did you get through the darkness and sufferings of your life?" After a long silence, I distinctly heard her whisper, "Trust God." I was waiting for more uplifting news. In my impatience, I finally yelled, "What the?" And I won't say in public what I said at that point. "Look where you are, and I'm stuck here in bed, not sure I'll ever walk again." A few more weeks of silence and self-pity. And then, tired of feeling sorry for myself, I asked Therese again, How did you get through your darkness? And that same voice said the same thing. Trust God. Don't you have anything else to say? But she was right. After spending 50 years learning to be a Messiah, to help everyone and get everything done, I had to surrender and trust to God's presence in this all. It wasn't about me trying to prove myself to others and the world. That spiritual inspiration became more important than the physical healing I needed. And this plunged me more into studying her life and her spirituality as God came to her disguised as her life. Therese learned that darkness, isolation, and silence could be great teachers if we're willing to listen and learn. I think that is one of her great lessons to us. Trust God with confidence, gratitude, and surrender. I think many of us know the story of her mother abandonment issues. Her mom, Zélie Guérin, Rose Taillé, her wet nurse for about 14 months, and then Pauline, her surrogate mother in her maturing years. The despair and the darkness she plunged into as she lost each one of them. It broke her spirit. But eventually she was healed by the divine feminine, Mary Victorious, so we'd call Our Lady of Grace, who for her became Our Lady of the Smile. And she experienced that heaven would never abandon her again. Mary had smiled through the very wounds of her life. Grace happens when we are wounded and vulnerable and awaken to God, who is always already there. True spirituality is not about denying or fleeing reality, but embracing life as it is offered to us. Too many people try the flight of denial and get nowhere, and it is self-destructive as we are experiencing in our society today. One of the great crises of her life was her Christmas Eve conversion. Amid a hurtful comment from her frustrated dad of when was she finally going to grow up, breaking into tears, she ran upstairs to her room. But she heard Jesus say, Therese, it's not about you. Get over yourself. That's a poor English translation of what she heard Jesus say. A half hour earlier, at the Christmas Eve Mass, she had gone to the baby Jesus in the crib to ask for the grace to be totally wholehearted. You know, we got to be careful what we ask for. Halfway through life, she was learning that we are here for others, not just to be self-serving and self-referential, making everything about ourselves. Religion is never narcissistic. The what's in it for me mentality. Look today how some people put their comfort and freedom ahead of the common good of others and the larger community. Faith expands our world, never shrinks it. Therese lived through the pandemic fear as we are experiencing today. She had to struggle to get accepted into the Carmel at an early age. Despite looking so fragile and pious, our Therese Martin was determined. She finally entered the Carmel on April 9th, 1888. She was only 15 and a half years old. Not every nun in the Carmel was pleased because they had experienced her immature outbursts over the years of her visiting. Plus, the Carmel was not the way she had romanticized it. This took major adjustment on her part. Life is often not what we expected it to be, and at times we are powerless before dreams smashed. Her Carmelite formation was tough as they tested her. At times, it shook her confidence. One of the nuns she learned to admire and love was Mother Geneviève, the beloved foundress of the Carmel of Lisieux 40-plus years earlier. She encouraged Therese at times of doubt because she saw something special in her. 18 months after her entrance, Therese made her first profession of religious vows. not only under the cloud of doubt that some of the nuns felt, but also her sad self-doubt, wondering whether God truly loved her. Was she good enough? Mother Geneviève helped her through it with words of affirmation and challenge. She experienced Jesus within her speaking, and Therese experienced a joy and consolation that meant everything to her. Don't we need affirmation and confirmation of others at times? This smiling, affirming mentor, Mother Geneviève, died on December 5th, 1891. This was an incredible loss for Therese and the community. And then some sort of epidemic started to spread through the convent. A month later, on Therese's 19th birthday, the oldest member of the community died of it. And then as Therese recalls those traumatic times in her manuscript too, she wrote, "Influenza broke out in the monastery 1 month after Mother Geneviève's death. 2 sisters and myself were the only ones left on our feet. My 19th birthday was celebrated with the death of the oldest member of the community, and this was followed by 2 other deaths. Death reigned supreme," she wrote. "The ones who were most ill were taken care of by those who could scarcely drag themselves around. In the midst of this abandonment, I truly felt that God was watching over us." Her faith amid darkness helped deepen Therese's belief that their passing over from this world was an awakening to the eternal delights of heaven. Therese's faith and trust was expanded, not lost or doubted during this darkness. She lived from the joy, the consolation, and the peace that Mother Geneviève had affirmed in her. Amid a time of serious Jansenism, where everything was seen as a punishment from God, she deepened her experience of God's unconditional love and presence. It is a lesson we can all learn from. Do we look for the divine? As the sufferings of so many people, their hunger, the disease, the fear, the injustice, the violence, do we hear God speaking to us, calling to us, challenging and empowering the best in us? 6 years later, Therese was drawn into the dark night of absence when she did not experience the presence of God. The dark nights reigned supreme in her soul for the last 18 months of her life. Here is a young girl and woman that needed confirmation and attention. Her tuberculosis came back, her health was deteriorating, and she felt no consolation from God. She became almost an emotional atheist. She experienced abandonment so deep that she heard shadow echoes within her, dashing all her hopes of heaven and union. Eventually, Therese was so weak, the nuns took her downstairs to the infirmary at the back of the convent for isolation. TB was contagious. During the early years, she had been able to receive communion, which nurtured her spirit. When she was moved to the isolation of the infirmary, it was a dark time for a poor soul who was already experiencing the dark night of the senses and spirit for about 16 months. That's a long time. And then she was isolated from communion because her body could no longer hold it. That was the last straw. The one thing that spoke to her of Jesus still reaching out to her was taken away. Darkness deepens and it isolates. But from that experience of being denied the sacrament, instead of pouting and getting angry or silent, she spoke her deepest truth from her experience. Everything is grace. She embraced God's presence in everything and everywhere. That everything is grace is her greatest teaching. Not just the stuff that we like or think is holy and good. Everything, including the disappointments, the disease, the darkness, the wounds, the hurts, the challenges, the frustrations, and the threats. God permeates every aspect of our lives. And in fact, we probably awaken us more through the suffering and darkness than when we get out of the way and allow God to be God in our world. The divine fingerprints and breath are all over us. So as we celebrate her feast day in friendship, let beloved Saint Therese lead us to that trust in the divine presence, without sacraments, symbols, and religious rituals that have helped us along, by truly embracing the gift of the divine indwelling of God within us, at the very center of who we are, awakening us to believe, to live from, and to be empowered by the divine spark that is God within and around us, no matter how dark, elusive, or hidden God seems. We ask for the grace of embracing our life as the holy land of our life experience, and that our life really is a pilgrimage of grace. This is not a time for fear, hopelessness, violence, distancing judgments, despair, and division, but a time of grace if we listen and experience this God hopelessly and unconditionally in love with us, always present, a breath away, never leaving or abandoning us, no matter how dark, silent, or hidden God seems. Therese teaches us joy, confidence, trust, optimism, wholeheartedness, generosity, and a non-judgmental acceptance of what life offers us, in the ways our mysterious God is revealing, loving, seducing, alluring, and transforming us in our world. So let's, on this feast day, as a tribute to her, let her do her work in us and through us to transform a world desperately in need of healing and hope, and a trust in the presence of God everywhere. Despite what we think or experience, everything is grace. And I'd like to close with a prayer of trust in time of darkness. Therese, sensitive and precious as you are, you learn the wisdom that alone we are helpless, in God we are powerful. Teach us the lesson of trust and surrender. Like you, I am sometimes overwhelmed by sorrow, challenges, disappointments, and worries. I become fearful that I cannot take any more suffering of body, mind, spirit, or relationship. Suffering isolates. I feel alone and heavy with fear. Sensitive little flower, I need your faith that we are not abandoned. Give me your generous spirit, which places my sufferings, hurts, and hopes in the hands of Jesus. Teach me to humbly drink the chalice of what life offers, in the sure belief that God is strengthening me, not destroying me. Teach me the childlike trust that allowed God to transform your sensitivity, fears, bitter abandonment, and sufferings into an expanded, comforting, and joyful life of faith in God's love. I feel helpless. Empower me to drink of God's tender love and strong protection. Blessed feast day.